Okay, so analysing the data in Excel. So this is really simple. But before I show you what to do, there's something I want to mention about this spreadsheet. So you'll notice that customers have more than one record. So each customer will have more than one record. And this is because they get a record for each time that they mention a feature that they find valuable. So this one, I've got this customer, the first customer interview I did, they mentioned 3 features that they found valuable. And then for each of those features, I asked them the questions that I mentioned in the blog. So there's 5 questions in the blog in this particular technique. So for every feature that they mention in question 1, then I'll ask them the subsequent questions about that particular feature. So if a customer mentions 3 features, then they'll have 3 records in this spreadsheet. If they mention 7 features, then they'll have 7 records in this spreadsheet. Okay, so let's get started in analysing the data. So the first thing you need to do is select the 5 columns that have got the questions in them. And then you need to drag that down and select all the rows that have got answers from those questions from the customers. So you might have more than that, more than what you can see on my screen at the moment. You might have a lot more. Just make sure you've got all the rows selected and the 5 columns selected. Once you've done that, you don't need to worry about it again. You're not going to need to do this again. Just keep that selected. All right, so now we've got the data selected, we're going to create our first pivot table. Now, this is really simple. All you need to do is go over to Insert and then select Pivot Table. Now, I'm using a Mac, so yours might look slightly different if you're using a Windows machine, but it's the same. You go to Insert and Pivot Table. Then you get this little pop-up. This pop-up you don't need to worry about. It's just telling you the data that you've already got selected. So we're going to click OK. And then now you can start to build up your pivot table. So on the right hand side, you've got the questions that you asked in the customer interviews. And then on the left hand side is where your pivot table is going to exist once you've built it. And this one is really simple. So we're going to be looking at the most valued features from these customer interviews. So all I'm going to do is pull in what features do you value most into the rows. So you can see now they exist in the rows. But I'm also going to pull that same question into values. And now this is counting the number of times each of these features were mentioned in the customer interviews. So you can see the 2 most valued features are this one and this one. So we can really start to dig in further in a moment in the next steps into really understand why these features are being used and why they're really valued. Before I move on to the next step, I'm just going to rename this tab so I remember what it is, and this is valued features. Now you can call these tabs whatever you want. I just call them something to make sure that I remember what that particular pivot table's about. All right, moving on to the next one. Okay, so very similar to the one that we've just done around understanding the most valued features. This time we want to know the most commonly solved problems. So very similar again, Insert, Pivot Table, click OK. And this time, rather than bringing in what features do you value the most, we're going to bring in what problems does this feature help solve. That goes into rows and it goes into values. And very similar to last time, you can now see rather than the list of features, this is a list of problems and which ones are most commonly solved. So we now know that our product helps solve problems around planning interventions for pupils, and it helps solve problems around teacher time. So teacher workload is a big issue in schools, as we all know, and this helps solve part of that problem. Okay, so we're now building up an understanding of our most valued features and the most commonly solved problems. And again, similar to last time, I'll just rename that tab to make sure I understand what it's all about. Okay, so we know which features are valued the most, and we also know what problems we're helping solve the most. But what we don't know yet is why people use these particular features, and that's what we're going to work out next. So to do that, we combine the answers from question 1 with the answers from question 2, and we can compare those. Okay, so if I go to Insert, Pivot Table, and then OK, and we're going to use it slightly different this time. This time we're going to bring the features question into columns. So I'll get my features across the top now. And then I'm going to bring the why question into rows and also into values. So why do people use this particular feature? We know this feature is highly valued, but why do they use it? So these people are saying that they use it for pupil progress meetings. So when they're getting ready for their pupil progress meetings, this is the report, this is their go-to feature for them to get ready for that particular meeting. The other really highly valued feature was this one, and this has a split reason for using. So the why around this one is to combine Key Stage 2 attainment predictions, but it's also to identify subject weaknesses. So now we're getting a deeper understanding of not only which features are highly valued, but why. All right, so this time we're going to do something very similar, but we're going to work out which features solve which common problems. So again, over to Insert, Pivot Table, click OK. And then again, we need to bring our features question into the columns, but this time we're going to be bringing in the problems into the rows and into the values. So now we've getting a list of problems that we help solve, and then the features that help solve those problems. And again, looking at this feature, which we know is a really commonly valued feature, well, the problems that this solves mainly is around teacher time. And then this one, also a very common one. Now this is split over two. This is split around the problems about accurately predicting Key Stage 2 results, but it's also around time saving for subject leaders. But you can now start to dig into the other features as well, which are the most common problems and which features solve those problems. Really starting to get a deep insight into what's happening now. So we now know which features are most valued. We know what problems those features are helping solve. We know why people are using those features, but we don't know how yet. So we don't know what actions they're actually taking to get that value. And that's what we're going to do in this step. So we're going to go to Insert Pivot Table again. We're going to click OK again. And we're going to bring in the features question into the column like we did last time. But this time we're going to be bringing in what actions did you take into the rows and into the values. So now we're getting the actions that they took on the left-hand side for each of the features. So again, concentrating on this feature because we identified that this was one of the most commonly valued features. Well, now we know that teachers use this for saving time. They use it for pupil progress meetings, but this particular step is telling us exactly what they're doing. Now they're printing this report before they go to the pupil progress meetings. So that's an action that we really need to get people to be doing when they're new to using our product. If we can get them doing that early, they're getting early value out of the product, and that means that they're primed to ask for a referral. Alright, so with the previous steps, we really understand now what people are doing, why they're doing it, and what problems they're solving. So that's given us that real deep understanding of how they get that value really early on. And that's important because, as I've mentioned a few times, that means you can go and ask for those referrals faster. They'll start referring for you because they're seeing that value so early on. But we don't want to stop there. We really want to know if we can improve that time to value. So where is the areas for improvement? Because the faster they see value, the more likely they are to refer you. So that's what we're going to look at next. Very, very similar technique to what we've done in the previous few steps, but now we're going to start to have a look at where we can improve. So if I go to Insert, Pivot Table, click OK for the last time, and this time again I'm going to bring in the features into the columns, but now I'm going to bring in the how we can improve question 5 into the rows and the values. So now if we look at this feature again, which we know is the highest value feature, well, we've got 4 people telling us it can't be improved, it's already perfect. But now we've got 8 people who have said, well, actually, rather than me having to be printing off that report to go to my pupil progress meeting, it would be much better for me if that report could just be emailed to me in a Word document, for example. So they want to save more time. Rather than them having to print that report, they want it just sending to them. They can load the laptop up in that pupil progress meeting, and then that'll make this feature even more valuable to them. So I've picked on this particular feature as I've gone through all this, but in every step you should be looking at the other features, the other problems, the other reasons why people are using particular features, because you'll really start to be able to map out what you need your customers to be doing really on in that journey with you. And again, I'll say it one more time, the reason you want to do that is because they'll see that value really early on, and they'll be much more likely to get you those referrals.